Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing a really focused analysis of financial stewardship,
And we're pulling it all directly from Larry Burkett's work, The Word on Finances.
which is subtitled Practical Wisdom and Bible Reference Guide for Today's Economic Climate.
And that title really says it all. I mean, this is so much more than just another finance guide.
Absolutely.
What we have here is a source that takes everything, wealth, debt, giving, work, and just roots it completely in a theological worldview.
Right. Burkett's whole frame for the discussion is this kind of radical idea that God's Word gives comprehensive financial advice.
Comprehensive is the key word. He believes it covers every single facet of economic life.
So our mission today is pretty critical. We really want to try and cut through, all the decades of secular financial noise and extract the absolute core nuggets of knowledge about handling our finances, but seeing them through this very specific, very high standard biblical lens.
And that means looking at both the internal framework.
The attitudes, the convictions.
Exactly. And then the external actions that have to, logically flow from them.
It's that emphasis on the internal, on the spiritual framework that really feels like the true foundation of the whole thing.
It is. The source makes it emphatically clear right from the start. It says, the success or failure of applying these principles is determined, and this is a quote, in great part by our attitudes.
So it's not about having the perfect spreadsheet.
Not at all. Or the right investment portfolio. You have to get the heart right first.
Right.
The ultimate goal, and he really hammers this home, is to be changed by the knowledge.
Yeah.
To move beyond just hearing it to becoming doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves.
That sets the stage for a much, much deeper conversation than just, simple budgeting.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack those foundational principles right away. We have to start with the spiritual and the mental prerequisites for any kind of financial health, and that begins with commitment.
When we talk about commitment here, it's defined in just the sharpest possible terms. It's all about what you truly treasure. Your financial commitment is just a barometer, really, for your spiritual commitment.
So where your money goes, your heart follows.
Basically, yeah. If your heart is dedicated to accumulating worldly things, if that's where your treasure is, then your commitment to godly stewardship it naturally breaks down.
Especially when things get tough.
Especially when sacrifice is required. That's the test.
And the source doesn't leave any room for ambiguity on this, does it? It goes right to Matthew 6.24.
We cannot serve God and mammon. And that word mammon. It's interesting.
People often think of it as just, wealth in general.
Right, some vague concept. But here it represents something very specific. It's the temptation to trust immaterial possessions as your ultimate source of security and worth.
The thing you rely on.
Precisely. And the source is careful to clarify that material things aren't inherently evil. They're explicitly called tools.
Just tools.
Really tools that we're entrusted with and that we're expected to use for accomplishing God's work.
Which includes things like providing for your family, helping people in need.
All of that. The failure, the sin, comes when the tool becomes the master.
So a proper commitment requires this active choice to trust. We're told to delight in the Lord, commit our ways to Him.
And then He will grant the desires of our hearts. It sounds almost like an equation.
But it's really about dependency, isn't it?
It is. If you seek His kingdom first, then all these other financial needs, the material things we need for life, they will be added to you.
It's like the ultimate insurance policy, but it's rooted in trust, not in collateral.
That's a great way to put it. And that kind of commitment leads right into the second foundational attitude, which might be the most misunderstood one in our consumer culture.
Oh, definitely. Contentment. I think this is where the modern definition just clashes so severely with the biblical one. Most people, when they hear contentment, they immediately think of
complacency.
Exactly, complacency. They picture someone suffering through a miserable situation, but, putting on a polite face, just passive resignation.
And the source is so clear that this passive attitude is absolutely not what contentment means.
The distinction is vital.
It is. Complacency is giving up. It's saying, I can't change this, so I'll just endure it. Contentment, on the other hand, is an active acceptance.
Active how?
It's rooted in security because you know who is in charge. It means knowing that you are, right now, in the center of God's will.
And that frees you up.
It frees you to diligently change the things you can change. If you're in debt, you work like crazy to get out.
Right.
But you willingly and securely accept the things you cannot change because the one who is in control is known and trusted.
So you're shifting your focus away from the external chaos of the circumstance, like a market crash or losing a job.
To the internal, unwavering security you find in that spiritual alignment.
That's the core insight.
It is. The secret of a happy life, and he points to the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4 here, is learning how to deal with both the highs and the lows.
He says he knows how to be abased and how to abound.
Yes. He's instructed in both how to be full and how to be hungry. That ability to manage both prosperity and, humble means that's the real mark of spiritual security.
That is such a challenging standard for a society that is constantly chasing the next level of financial independence.
It really is. And the source reinforces this with 1 Timothy 6.628, saying, godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment.
But the great gain isn't the wealth.
No. It's the spiritual grounding. That's the great gain.
It forces you to reevaluate what being rich truly means. I think it's Proverbs that says, a little with the fear of the Lord is better than great treasure and turmoil.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Or that the working person's sleep is pleasant, whether they eat a little or a lot, but the full stomach of the rich, it doesn't let them sleep.
It's a direct warning against the anxiety that comes with uncontrolled accumulation.
It is, which moves us perfectly to the third foundational principle, wisdom.
And this is presented as the most crucial request we should make when we're facing any financial problem. We're told not to chase money.
But to chase understanding.
Indeed. When you're facing financial difficulties, the first thing you should ask for is wisdom. Not more income, not a better interest rate.
But for the fundamental knowledge you need to make sound decisions. Wisdom is defined as the key that will unlock all the other necessary doors.
And the promise attached to that is huge. James 1 says that God gives wisdom liberally, without reproach. But what does that actually mean, in a practical financial sense?
It means that wisdom is the foundation for prudent financial decision-making. The source really drives home this valuation disparity by contrasting wisdom with actual material wealth.
Right, Proverbs 20.15.
Exactly. It makes the case that knowledge and wisdom are more precious than gold or an abundance of jewels.
So if you have to choose between a guaranteed investment that gives you temporary cash or an insight that guides all your future actions,
wisdom is always the superior choice. Every time.
It completely recenters the whole goal of financial building. We tend to focus on building a material house, but the source brings up Proverbs 24.34.
By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches.
That just flips the conventional definition of riches on its head.
Completely. It's saying the stability of the house, your entire financial life, comes first from the wisdom and understanding you apply.
Only after that foundation is secure.
Can the rooms be filled with those precious and pleasant resources? The intellectual and spiritual foundations must come before the tangible assets.
So if you have the wisdom, the resources will follow, not the other way around.
That's the principle.
Okay, so that holistic view, commitment, contentment, and wisdom, that forms the stable foundation. But we all know life is full of temptations that try to erode these principles.
For sure.
So let's pivot and look at section 2, where we get into the anti-attitudes, the warning signs that show us when those foundational commitments are starting to crack.
The source is very clear on this. It says internal failings are the root cause of external financial defeat. So we've established the right attitudes.
Now we examine the wrong attitudes, and we start with the insidious problem of greed and storage.
And greed in this context is defined really specifically, and I think perhaps surprisingly for some.
It's not just wanting more.
No. It is setting aside money that will never, under any foreseeable circumstance, actually be used.
Pure hoarding.
It is pure hoarding, and the motivation, as the source explains, it isn't usually pure malice. It's a desperate, misplaced desire for security.
So the money is accumulated and stored because it brings this feeling of independence, of security.
Which separates your dependence from God and places it squarely on your possessions.
And that focus shifts entirely inward.
Which is why the source notes that it so often separates families and friendships. It's the anxiety about the future that's driving this excessive accumulation. The focus is on self, not on stewardship for others.
And the source, it pulls no punches on the spiritual consequences of this kind of hoarding.
No, it warns that many believers will be ashamed to face the Lord and explain why they hoarded money unnecessarily, while others, maybe in their own community, went hungry.
Wow.
The danger of greed is only really reduced once you make an intentional commitment to a disciplined, shared lifestyle, no matter how large your income might become. It has to be a structural change, not an emotional one.
This analysis immediately brings to mind the parable of the rich fool.
Of course. The source uses that to hammer home the warning against being on guard against every form of greed, and notes that life does not consist of possessions, even when you have an abundance.
What's so fascinating about that parable is that the rich man, he wasn't condemned for having a good harvest.
No, not at all. His judgment came because of his intent. His decision was to tear down his barns and build larger ones solely for his own personal ease.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
Right. Making the assumption that his possessions guaranteed him future years of security. And God's response is just definitive. You fool, this very night your soul is required of you.
So the lesson is that true security is never, ever rooted in material storage.
It's rooted in relationship and commitment.
Exactly. Okay, so moving from greed, we tackle what the source calls the major sin in Christendom, pride.
Yeah, and pride is so deceptive.
Why is that?
Precisely because financial success in our culture often demands that we take credit for it. It's considered normal. It manifests so subtly when we forget the ultimate source of our wealth.
The temptation described in Deuteronomy 8:17.
Yes, to say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth.
So when we attribute success purely to our own merit, our own hard work, or we desire recognition for our material achievements,
We fundamentally forget that we are just stewards. We're managing God's property. Pride is taking ownership where only stewardship was granted.
And the consequence for that failure of humility is severe.
It is. When our heart is proud, the source says, wrath can come upon us. Humility, on the other hand, means accepting God's blessings, whether they're earned through effort or inherited, without feeling superior to anyone else.
It forces you to ask that hard question. Do I truly consider myself higher than someone else just because I have a greater ability to earn or more material advantages?
And the source gives such a powerful illustration for this, using the Pharisee and the tax gatherer.
Right. The Pharisee exalts himself, listing his religious and financial practices in his prayer.
I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all that I get. And he's comparing himself favorably to the tax gatherer.
That is so convicting because it shows that the very disciplines that should reflect obedience, tithing, diligence, fasting, they can become fuel for an inflated ego.
The person who humbled himself was one who was exalted. Financial discipline, if it's rooted in self-congratulation, becomes spiritually detrimental.
It creates a focus on success that's all about status, not responsibility.
And that preoccupation feeds right into the final destructive attitude we're highlighting, the attraction to get-rich-quick schemes.
This is about distinguishing patient, diligent stewardship from chasing quick wealth.
Exactly. The get-rich-quick mentality is all about making money very quickly with very little applied effort. The source points to things like state lotteries as examples of this cultural sickness.
And this stands in direct contrast to the reality that most people who achieve genuine, lasting wealth,
They do so by working diligently at what they do best and what they love the most. True wealth, in that scenario, is just the long-term byproduct of effort and passion.
get-rich-quick schemes promise the byproduct without the process.
They do. And these schemes sound so inviting. But the source identifies 3 specific, dangerous premises that lead to sure financial loss.
What are those mechanisms of failure?
Okay, first, they get you involved in things you don't fully understand. The complexity is often a feature, not a bug. It's designed to mask the risk.
Second,
They demand hasty decisions. They create urgency to prevent you from doing proper research or getting consultation. And third, they inevitably result in suffering significant losses, often wiping out years of legitimate savings.
it's really just another form of gambling, isn't it? Prioritizing hope and speculation over planning and patience.
Absolutely. The Proverbs counter principle on this is crystal clear. It emphasizes the value of intentionality. The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty,
Haste is the direct route to financial ruin.
because it's based on your own desire overwhelming God's wisdom.
The shift from these internal attitude failures to, external disastrous actions leads us perfectly to the next massive area of practical financial living, how we deal with credit and debt management.
This is where the rubber really meets the road for a modern listener, I think.
For sure.
Because the principles laid out here are just so radically countercultural. Section 3 dives deep into the rules for borrowing and lending, and it starts with this premise. Borrowing is the exception, not the norm.
God doesn't absolutely prohibit credit, but He establishes these incredibly stringent guidelines because borrowing carries such an enormous spiritual weight.
And for a society that is literally built on credit mortgages, car loans, credit cards, these guidelines are, well, they're challenging.
So what are the core rules that the source extracts?
There are three non-negotiables. One, borrowing should never be normal for God's people. Two, it should never be long-term. And three, you should never sign surety.
Let's unpack that. Signing surety means taking on an obligation without an absolutely certain way to cover it.
Right, co-signing.
But wait a minute. If borrowing is never normal and never long-term, how does the source reconcile that with the reality of, say, standard home ownership?
Which almost universally requires a 15 or 30-year mortgage.
Right. That sounds like a fundamental rejection of modern wealth building.
And it is a radical challenge. The source argues that while long-term debt like a mortgage might be an unfortunate necessity in some economic climates, it has to be approached with extreme caution and humility and diligence.
Not treated as just a standard financial tool.
Exactly. The emphasis is on the spiritual weight of the transaction. If a debt is legitimate, God expects it to be repaid, regardless of what secular law like bankruptcy might dictate.
So even if bankruptcy offers you a legal way out, the moral and spiritual obligation to repay the money you owed, according to this perspective, it remains intact.
Precisely. And the consequence of engaging in debt without this spiritual diligence is profound.
Proverbs 22.7.
The borrower becomes the lender's slave. That servitude represents a loss of freedom, a compromise of stewardship, a transfer of control away from you and to your creditor.
And that servitude is what must be avoided at all costs.
At all costs.
This principle is even applied to religious institutions, which I found fascinating. The source really challenges the common practice of church borrowing.
Yes. The source suggests that excessive church debt actually reflects a lack of commitment to giving among the congregation.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. In this view, God's intention is to provide surpluses at the appointed time through the faithful giving of the body.
Which would remove the need for indebtedness.
Right. And we are challenged to find a single instance in the entire Bible where God manifested himself through a loan to accomplish his purposes.
That really reframes the whole concept of church finance, arguing that relying on borrowing is a deviation from the expectation of supernatural provision and committed stewardship.
It does. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about the cost of borrowing, interest and usury.
The sheer magnitude of money that Christians spend globally on interest payments is highlighted as money that could otherwise be used, to further God's kingdom.
It's a deeply sobering thought. The source notes that many major denominations actually spend more on interest payments than they dedicate to foreign missions.
That just illustrates a massive redirection of resources.
It illustrates misplaced priorities rooted in debt. Now, while there's little scripture dealing with paying interest in the Old Testament, there are powerful admonishments against charging interest.
Particularly to countrymen or fellow believers.
Yes, and this is the issue of usury. Usury here is defined as an exorbitant or abusive rate of interest.
Which the source suggests is true of most credit cards today.
Absolutely. So the biblical standard for lending to a countryman or a fellow believer was essentially interest-free.
Why was that prohibition so strict? What was the principle behind it?
It was intended to be a powerful communal testimony. The lender was supposed to act as a witness to sacrificial support, showing a commitment to God and community that outweighed any potential loss of revenue from an interest payment.
So it wasn't just a financial regulation?
No, it was a matter of community solidarity and protecting the vulnerable.
This brings up a really challenging application point for you, the listener. If someone has charged others usurious interest, what's the required response based on this high standard?
The biblical standard, and this draws from the principle of restitution we'll discuss later, suggests actively working to repay that excess interest back to the debtor.
That requires a radical degree of integrity and obedience.
It does. Admitting a past wrong and then correcting it economically. It requires having the courage to put the truth into action, which is the constant theme here.
And finally, let's address that third principle of debt avoidance. Surety.
Surety means taking on an obligation to pay without a sure and certain way to cover that payment.
This is co-signing.
This is co-signing. Or guaranteeing a debt that, if the primary borrower defaults, you cannot immediately and comfortably cover with your existing liquid assets.
And why is this act so strongly condemned in Proverbs?
It's seen as presuming upon the future and upon God's will. You're stepping outside the boundaries of prudent, humble planning.
The language in Proverbs 6 about this is almost desperate in its urgency.
It is. It says if you become surety for a neighbor, you have to humble yourself and importune your neighbor. Don't even let yourself rest until you are delivered from that pledge.
That level of anxiety and urgency really shows how seriously the source views this kind of financial entanglement. What's the provided solution to ensure certainty?
The only certain way to secure a debt is to collateralize it. If you can't pay the collateral, a car, a house, whatever is taken, and you're freed from further obligation.
Assuming no deficiency agreement is signed.
Right, and that's contrasted with signing a deficiency agreement where you agree that if the collateral doesn't cover the full amount, you still owe the balance.
Yeah.
The principle is always establish certainty, humility, and immediate deliverance from debt as your priorities.
That sets a very, very high bar for financial involvement. So from the restrictive nature of debt, we move to the outward expression of financial freedom in Section 4, giving and provision.
This is where all those principles of right attitudes and responsible credit management really pay off.
Giving is presented not as a burden, right, but as the outward material expression of a deep spiritual commitment.
Exactly. It's the clearest indication of a willing and obedient heart and a realization of who truly owns everything. The source insists that the motive has to be right.
Rooted in gratefulness and joy.
Right. Rather than in fear-like thinking God will punish you if you don't give or, giving to impress other people. It has to be done modestly and humbly.
And to give some structure to this act, the source distills giving into 3 practical and clear levels that operate sequentially.
That's right. The foundation is 1, the tithe, which is defined as the minimum portion of 1/10.
And its primary purpose isn't just resource generation.
No, it's to be a constant testimony of God's absolute ownership over everything we have. Then comes 2, the offering.
Which is anything above the tithe.
Yes, given specifically to meet needs beyond the immediate church structure, like missionaries or local families who are lacking food. And finally, there is 3, sacrificial giving.
Which means giving up things we ourselves want, or maybe even legitimately need.
Because others have a far greater life-threatening necessity.
And when discussing the tithe, there's a huge emphasis on the concept of first fruits. This speaks directly to the quality and the timing of the giving.
Yes, and this challenges a lot of common modern practices. First fruits means giving the first and the best of all that is received.
The source explicitly applies this to gross income, right? Before taxes.
Gross income, inheritance, dividends, profits from sales. The core idea is honoring God from the first part of all you have, which enables God to take control of the rest.
Rather than waiting until the end of the month to see what's left over.
Exactly.
Why is that distinction between gross and net income so pivotal from this perspective?
Because tithing on your gross income affirms that God's claim comes before any governmental, corporate, or personal claim on your earnings.
So if you wait until after taxes and deductions?
You're effectively tithing on what the government distributes to you, not on the full provision God provided. Tithing on the first fruit is a declaration of ownership and trust before any other obligation is met.
And the source provides a pretty significant benchmark for generosity, citing the standard set by the Jewish people under the law.
It's a remarkable challenge. It notes that the Jewish people actually gave 3 separate tithes, which averaged out to 23.33% of their income annually.
3 tithes.
1 to the general storehouse, a second for festivals and the poor, and then a third every 3rd year for Hebrew and Gentile widows and orphans.
And the challenge presented to the listener
is that Christians, living under grace and benefiting from Christ's sacrifice, should aim to exceed the standard that was set under the law.
That magnitude of giving leads us right into the source's understanding of provision and surplus. God's promise isn't just about having enough to scrape by.
No. It's something much larger, and it's intended for a specific purpose. Provision is promised to meet our needs, our basic requirements. But the defining concept is providing an abundance, a surplus.
So that we can help others.
Exactly. This multiplication of abundance only happens when we internalize and act on this principle of sharing. We're instructed to provide for our families, an obligation that even extends after death to ensure their security.
And the source is clear that God is not against prosperity itself. So where does the danger lie?
The danger isn't in the amount. It's in the attitude towards the surplus. For a good steward, a surplus is a trust from God to be used for future needs or the needs of others.
But for someone with a greedy or a proud heart?
That surplus becomes a potential trap of Satan, leading them away from spiritual priorities. The source uses a powerful word to describe the time and energy demands of wealth. Tyranny.
Tyranny.
Prosperity and materialistic lifestyles can become a tyranny that demands our energy and attention, preventing us from fulfilling our true calling. Good stewardship requires planning for the surplus before the money even arrives.
That planning prevents the tyranny from taking root. And tying this back to the social aspect, the source makes a very pointed statement about the function of welfare.
It does. The source asserts that welfare, defined as the control, administration, and distribution of daily needs to the vulnerable, is primarily the function of the body of Christ, not the government.
So the government's goal is temporal relief.
But the spiritual imperative to transform hearts and lives belongs to the church. We are expected to help the needy. We're defined here as those doing the best they can with what they have, but who still come up short.
This places the responsibility for social safety nets squarely back on the individual and the local church community.
It pushes them to practice sacrificial giving, rather than just delegating that responsibility somewhere else.
Exactly. The first-generation church example is cited where assets were sold and the proceeds were surrendered to meet the immediate needs of other believers.
And the ultimate question it poses is whether we will truly be doers of the word instead of hearers only, especially when you look at global needs and the resources we may possess.
With the principles of right attitudes, responsible debt avoidance, and committed giving established, we shift into the final practical application realm in Section 5, work, wages, and application. We begin with the core work expectation, diligence.
Diligence in the workplace is held up as the single most important trait in a valued employee, and it's viewed as a spiritual requirement.
It's an entire work ethic.
It is. It encompasses honesty, purpose, energy, and excellence. And the ultimate standard for our work is in Colossians 3:23, doing it heartily, as for the Lord rather than for men.
And that diligence can't just be restricted to the job site. It has to permeate our personal financial lives, too.
Absolutely. It applies equally to personal financial management, which today means diligently balancing budgets, tracking investments, monitoring your spending through apps or software. You have to watch over even the smallest expenditures.
Diligence is the opposite of slothfulness,
Which is defined as being willing to just get by, doing less than our best, and thereby becoming a negative witness for Christ in the economic realm.
The source also stresses the necessary reciprocal relationship between employees and employers.
Yes, to ensure fairness and mutual respect. Employees have to honor the authority placed above them, recognizing that the employer-employee relationship, while mutually beneficial, is not a partnership in the business sense.
And on the flip side,
employers are commanded to treat employees fairly regarding wages and working conditions, meeting their minimum needs. The overarching responsibility for Christians, whether you're an employee or an employer, is to reflect diligence and excellence as a positive witness of your faith.
this requires a very practical balance, especially when it comes to working hours and avoiding burnout.
It does. The source observe that no one can maintain the correct balance between work, family, and God if they're consistently working more than 60 hours a week.
While periods of intense work might be necessary,
Prolonged excess hours cause relationships to suffer and spiritual priorities to become unbalanced. It's a call for common sense, diligence, and excellence, but within a framework that honors God's intended design for balance and rest.
next, we look at the core practice of prudent foresight, the importance of planning and saving.
Planning is defined here as the written commitment of spiritual goals. It's presented as essential to any successful financial program because it's an expression of wisdom and prudence.
The prudent person, according to Proverbs, foresees danger and avoids it.
While the foolish rushes ahead and pays the penalties. Just like a house needs blueprints, our stewardship needs written plans. A short-term budget and a long-term plan to meet eventual needs like retirement or kids' education.
So planning isn't just a secular discipline, it's a spiritual one because it prevents us from stumbling into necessity.
Exactly. The consequence of failing to plan is that debt becomes a necessity, not an exception. Saving is emphasized as legitimate for future needs like education or old age.
And it's explicitly stated that saving is not a lack of faith.
No, it's a prudent application of wisdom. It's the method you use to purchase with cash, avoiding interest and debt entirely.
And here we have to revisit that critical distinction between saving and hoarding or greed.
Right. Saving must have a specific God-honoring purpose for the money being stored, a future known need. Hoarding is strictly forbidden because it transfers your dependence from God to the money itself.
Which is a form of idolatry.
It is. God allows accumulation in prospect of advancing years, but that savings plan has to be rooted in stewardship and calculation.
The wise calculate the cost before building the tower,
Lest they lay the foundation and cannot finish.
Finally, we turn to the radical and demanding principle of restitution, making it economically unprofitable to cheat.
If you have cheated or defrauded another person, making restitution is immediately required to right a wrong and to restore the relationship and the material loss.
The spiritual commitment to God demands this corrective action.
It does. The source suggests establishing an absolute personal standard. Retain no personal benefit whatsoever as a result of deception or dishonesty. This preconditions your response to temptation.
That seems like an intensely proactive standard. It's designed to discourage the thought of cheating before it even takes hold.
That is its function. And the gold standard for restoration, the model that sets this bar impossibly high, is the example of Zacchaeus.
Right. He not only confessed his fraudulent activities,
But immediately pledged to repay 400% of what he defrauded.
400%. That is astronomical. What is the impact of establishing such a high penalty on yourself?
Establishing a standard that high makes it economically unprofitable to cheat or to deceive. By setting that expectation internally, you ensure that if temptation wins in the moment, the long-term, devastating economic consequence of the required restitution ensures the lesson is learned immediately and permanently.
It's a mechanism for immediate repentance and future deterrence.
Exactly.
What an incredible framework we've analyzed today. I mean, we've moved from the required inner condition of commitment and wisdom
Through the avoidance of destructive attitudes like greed and pride,
to the external discipline of debt management, giving, and diligent application.
and every single section, every single principle emphasizes that financial freedom is not about high income, it's about proper spiritual governance.
We covered the importance of right attitudes, commitment to God over mammon, contentment in all circumstances, and seeking wisdom above gold.
And we detailed the destructive attitudes like greed and the temptation of haste.
And then we moved into practical governance. The severe warning against long-term borrowing, the seriousness of usury and surety, and prioritizing debt repayment as a spiritual obligation.
And finally, translating that freedom into action through giving and work.
Honoring God with first fruits, viewing prosperity as an abundance intended for helping others, and maintaining diligence and careful, purpose-driven planning in all our labor.
And the source consistently reminds us that true riches are promised to those who are faithful in the stewardship of worldly resources. We're told that wealth, in its truest form, includes salvation, peace, and health, and is attained only through faithful obedience in the small things.
It's a profoundly holistic approach, uniting the spiritual and the economic. But the ultimate conclusion, the provocative thought that we're left with, it isn't simply about understanding these principles.
No, it's about the immediate and costly action of applying them.
Precisely. The core challenge here is drawn directly from John 13.1 Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.
It's not enough to intellectually assent to the source's wisdom. The challenge for you, the listener, is having the courage to put this knowledge into action.
Whether it's adjusting your attitude toward contentment during market volatilities, settling a lingering debt, or increasing your diligence at work and beginning that restitution process.
It has to be immediate, concrete action. So the question is, how does this knowledge fundamentally change the way you plan your next week and your next financial decision?